You're watching Sky News. Still to come, we'll see what's making the front pages of all of tomorrow's papers. Joining us tonight, former Downing Street Communications Director Jonathan Haslam and the journalist and broadcaster Nabila Ramdani. Good evening. Thank you for joining us. Amongst the stories, David Cameron appearing to, as the Times has the picture there, breaking out a plague of boils, given his anger of the £1.7 billion EU bill. In fact, I think it's a spotlight that he was pictured under in Brussels, but he is getting pretty red in the face at the financial demands. We'll be discussing that in more detail in a moment. Our press preview coming up for you in just a moment. A first look at those front pages. First, let's update you on our top stories with David Cameron insisting that the UK will not pay the £1.7 billion demanded by the EU by the December 1st deadline. Prime Minister saying it was unacceptable and unjustified. One of two nurses who contracted Ebola at a hospital in Texas has met President Obama at the White House after being declared free of the virus following treatment. And two people have been killed at a shooting in a school in the US, state of Washington, including the suspected gunman believed to be a former student. 3 others are critically injured. But it is now a time to look at those front pages in our press preview, and joining us for those headlines, former Downing Street veteran of European affairs. You remember it well, Jonathan Haslam, and journalist Nabila Ramdani. Meant in the nicest possible way, of course, a veteran. Indeed, yes. First, though, the front pages of all those papers. Daily Telegraph claiming that the former Labour leader and Prime Minister Tony Blair has told friends he thinks the Conservatives will win the next election because Ed Miliband has failed to connect with voters. The Mail, with David Cameron's admission that Britain may be more likely to vote to leave the EU after the European Commission demanded that extra £1.7 billion from the UK. The Express says the request has brought new calls for an early referendum on the EU. But the Times reports that Brussels could levy a penalty charge of more than £42 million a month if Britain refuses to pay by December 1st. While the Eye quotes the Prime Minister saying the Commission has behaved in an appalling way. The FT also going with the Prime Minister's outrage, but it adds that British officials played a role in actually endorsing the new EU budget. And The Guardian reflects that Chancellor George Osborne may have known of the Commission's demand for extra money 2 days before David Cameron and didn't tell him. The Independent, with an admission from the Daily Mirror, or Mirror Group publishers, that articles likely to have been sourced from illegal phone hacking during Piers Morgan's time as the paper's editor. Mr. Morgan has always denied any direct or indirect involvement in hacking, with no evidence that he was involved. While the Daily Mirror itself has an interview with last year's X Factor winner Sam Bailey, who says she was stalked on the internet and feared her children could be kidnapped. And The Sun has the woman who says she's allergic to X Factor judge Simon Cowell, vomiting, fainting, screaming, sweating, and is now on Prozac. And the Daily Star, well, no X Factor this time, a story about a man on benefits in dispute with his council. So, something for everyone there, maybe, including Jonathan, of course, and Nabila. We're going to go first for the Daily Mail. One step nearer to the EU exit. Brussels' shock demand, or was it a shock demand? Maybe.
Well, it wasn't quite as much of a shock to George Osborne as it was to David Cameron, who was told 2 days after the event.
Whoops.
Sorry, just sort of slipped my mind. It was a rounding error.
Does that happen often? Downing Street, number 11, number 10?
They don't always catch up with things, there's loads of stuff going on,
Mail goes through number 11's letterbox before it goes through number 10's.
It's always difficult, things get lost. This is fascinating, of course, because the Daily Mail, you get the sense that this headline has been there just waiting to go for a long time. And somebody said, great, headline 43 on the EU, we'll do that one. Yeah. And they've done it proud, and it is quite an astonishing story in every respect.
Indeed, and it will come as
quite remarkable, Nabila, that we could end up in this way. And just look at, where's the political nous somewhere within continental Europe around Brussels that says, it's a bit weird, we're just about to go and do over the Brits, and by the way, Greece, could you give us 95 million quid or euros, because obviously you've got the money. Netherlands, would you like to doff up a little bit of extra as well? And Germany, engine of growth.
Conspiracy theorists may even suggest that the European Commission would know what the political effect was going to be.
Well,
Could it be deliberate?
I think it's a huge story on two aspects, minimum. I mean, it's a huge story for Britain, of course, and it will give a huge boost to Eurosceptics in Britain and people who feel generally that Britain should get most out of Europe.
David Cameron in a very difficult position.
Indeed, and perhaps the person who will be most pleased about those headlines is Nigel Farage and UKIP, generally speaking. You know, UKIP is often described as a single-issue party, and Europe seems to be increasingly, you know, the issue that is going to be at the heart of the next elections. Not only general election next year, but also with the nearing of the by-election.
But yes, Mark was talking about a conspiracy theory, and we get so many different signals out of Europe. I mean, look at one example. After a tough time, saying, Junckers, you're not the man. What does Junckers do? High-five David Cameron when they have a meeting. They make up. Junckers then goes and gives Jonathan Hill, Lord Hill, quite a significant package as a European Commissioner in charge of financial regulation. It's enormously important.
When the city has been one of the big stories
absolutely. And this is important because Jonathan Hill's a great bloke. I know him. I used to work with him. He will do Britain a fantastically good job. But he was not a shoo-in for that job. Junckers got him there. And what do the Tories do in the MEP's ring? They either abstain or some of them vote against, or it's half-hearted. So when we're saying a conspiracy to do over the Brits, actually Junckers has tried to throw out quite a big olive branch. Yeah. And he's had it thrown back to a certain extent in his face, and David Cameron can't control his MEPs.
But I think that you know, Britain's European neighbours will also be jittery about this kind of story. I mean, if a successful economy like Britain effectively gets punished for performing well, then it really puts into question the whole European project, as it were.
And let's reflect, as the eye has it, I mean, this has come from David Cameron. It's not come from his Eurosceptics or his backbench. I mean, clearly, the way that he was talking about does, he is angry about this. What he sees maybe is some kind of ambush as he went to Brussels.
No, sure, he's angry, and he's right to be angry. He wasn't told, so it came as a bit of a surprise to him. This should not happen in government. One of the papers is suggesting that the Office for National Statistics probably knew about this quite a long time ago. So I'm sure Fleet Street's finest will be on the trail of who knew what when, and we will find out. But he has no place to go. He's got to be furious. I'm sure he is personally furious.
He's red
anyway.
in the face, as the Times has it there.
No, he's been completely
rather unfortunate under the spotlight.
But he's got no chance, Mark. He has to be out there on that.
And well, the other thing is, OK, he may say we're not going to pay by December the 1st, but what will the consequences be? And the Times then has got its calculator out and said, you know, under the treaty, if we fail to pay up, we've got additional charges. They're working it out, an additional 42.5 million quid every month as a fine.
No, it's huge. And there's also the possibility, of course, that the EU could take Britain to the European Court of Justice as well. I mean, it will be a long-winded procedure, and I don't think it's likely to happen at all. But, you know, there's this legal threat.
And Germany and France strangely quiet. Well, am I right to say that?
Mainly because they benefit from performing less well than Britain. And I think there's this widespread perception that the EU is there to support failed economies, and that those who are doing relatively well or who are relatively successful are there to bail out failed economies, and that's how it's being seen in Britain, certainly.
The victory of failure.
We also ought to remember that we've been down the fine route before. There have been one or two other instances when we have been threatened with fines. It's come out that we could have been fined. Now, one thing that Europe is phenomenally good at is fudge. Huge metric tons of fudge.
Brussels chocolate.
There is a meeting of finance directors or finance ministers about to happen.
And that adds to the mood of increasing Eurosceptics, dare I say. I mean, we've heard a Conservative MP today describing France's economy as a basket case economy, and that's certainly not what you want to hear about one of the founding fathers of the project.
OK, well, let's move to other matters. There's plenty of other things to discuss in the paper, because you've spotted here on the inside pages of the Mail, page 2, new crackdown on nuisance calls. Firms can face fines up to 500,000 for simply causing annoyance with PPI adverts. I think I had 3 today before I left the house.
This brings joy to the hearts of many of us who are here. I mean, you and I might have thought that we were on the receiving end of the millions of calls and text messages. But Sajid Javid has potentially the opportunity to make himself the most popular politician in
He's the
Britain.
Culture Secretary, just remind us.
He's the Culture Secretary, and he is talking about really gripping what has been an incredible nuisance to people. It drives us nuts. You can sign up for these preference opportunities to say, I don't want to be called, and it doesn't stop it. There are ways around it. For example, I'm sure you've been asked, and show of you, Nabila, would you take part in a survey? And that apparently gets you over the cold call, which shouldn't be coming through. Now, he's talking about very significant fines. If he can just reduce it, and it's 1 billion texts or telephone calls to 30
but what
million
if
of us
they
a
come
time.
from outside of the UK? That's
Well,
the
that's
problem,
the thing.
isn't it?
Increasingly, you
Follow
get
the
those
trail.
things from call centres
Yes.
in India or
Yeah, yeah.
other countries.
And they just automatic. They just press a button and off they go.
And
all
there
the
seems
time.
to be no way to tell them to end the nuisance.
Technology can help a bit. I mean, some of our telephone companies can give you phones that block them out. But this would be significant because you can follow a company trail, and somebody gets £500,000 of a fine. It's a bit of a wake-up call.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's go back to the front pages, and it's the Daily Mirror, which has got on the top right-hand corner a rather encouraging photo. Let's just move that down, because that is the wave that shows that Asher is on the mend. And in fact, David Bowden, our reporter, out in Prague to see him receiving his Porsche, I think it was.
Yes,
I'm right
it was
in
a
saying?
Porsche, yes.
Yeah, very
Yes.
smart as well. I mean, what a remarkable turnaround. He arrived at that clinic on a stretcher, leaving in a wheelchair, and now able to walk some steps as well.
Yes, clearly a little lad who's still very ill, but there are signs of encouragement. I think everybody knows that he's got an immense mountain to climb. I think the other thing that was interesting for me about the way in which the story is portrayed, I mean, I remember when it first broke, we were concerned about the family and had done the right
there is
thing.
on the inside. Oh, there's
And
the car, yeah.
you see the father and the mother clearly absolutely devoted to their child, and the dad spoke with such conviction and patent honesty about his feelings and everything that we're trying to do. It was interesting that he came out at this point and spoke in such an honest way, and he will have done a great deal there to reinforce the feeling that this is a family that did the right thing as far as they're concerned.
But there's an addition. Yeah, I'm not going back to the UK, he says. with
Exactly,
Asher.
there
At the
remain some
moment.
concerns at the moment. Yeah, they say
So
that they
what
fear
damage
that
has
they,
been done to that degree?
Well, clearly they lost trust and confidence of coming back. They fear that the little boy might be taken away from them, and that's why they're heading back to Spain.
Although we should make plain, of course, it's the NHS that's paying somewhat £60,000 towards this treatment in Prague.
Yes.
So
I think it's absolutely inconceivable that any of the authorities would take any action against them, but you can understand their nervousness. I mean, they were arrested,
Yes.
taken away from their other children.
and put in
Not
prison
easy.
by the Spanish authorities
Yes.
for a significant period, some would say.
Yes, a number of days.
Anyway, good to see him with. Yes, it is a Porsche and a wobbly smile this way, but it's a smile all the same. And we wish the family the very best, of course.
Indeed.
Still to come, the Queen's first day in the Twitter sphere. And apparently the trolls have already been at it. More coming up in a moment. Welcome back to our press preview with all the papers with Jonathan and Nabila as we head inside the Daily Express for a ranting Russell Brand and his outburst over 9/11. This is on Newsnight with Evan Davis now at the helm, of course.
Yes, indeed. And Russell Brand, he provoked fury when he said that he was open-minded about the idea that the US government was behind the 9/11 attacks. And he also said that he found interesting the relationship that the Bush family had with the Bin Laden family. And I actually remember a French actress, Marion Cotillard, who got involved in a similar conspiracy theory. She was hugely embarrassed by it, and she said that she was misquoted, and I'm pretty sure Russell Brand will do the same thing. I think the problem with conspiracy theories around a story like 9/11 is that it involved the death of thousands of people, and that's what makes them particularly distasteful. Of course, Russell Brand is a professional comedian first and foremost, and I've attended some of his gigs. I find him hugely entertaining, but I think one has to draw the line when it comes to...
Yeah, he's also indicating that the BBC had an anti-Islamic narrative in its coverage of the attack on the Canadian Parliament. Evan Davis asked Brand if he would consider standing as an MP at the next year's election. Brand reiterated his mistrust of politicians, said he simply hoped to amplify the voices of those who chose to take direct action. I can't quite understand what his agenda is.
I can't quite
does he
understand.
actually have one?
I can't quite understand what the agenda is of Newsnight, putting him on a programme. He's not a serious political figure. And they just need to be a bit more commonsensical about giving people an opportunity. He's quite clearly a little bit offbeat.
So does that say, is it saying more about Newsnight than it does about Russell Brand then?
I honestly believe that Newsnight's a programme that's
yeah.
lost its way. Programmes have their natural life.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure that anymore you can say this is a must-see programme. It seems to have gone far too populist. It doesn't attract the same sort of level of politician as it used to. It's not going to influence the papers the next day. And it's
Although
not
they
an
won't be
effective
too
roundup.
unhappy with the fact that the paper's picked up some rather, should we say, controversial remarks by Russell Brand, is it?
I think we're sort of clutching at straws for Newsnight, Mark.
Right, OK. Daily Mail, page 3. And it is the Queen's first tweet and her first troll already. I guess that goes with the territory nowadays.
Well, obviously one is shocked, but there we are. I think it's great. The Science Museum has had quite an outing. It's doing a complete makeover of one of its major halls there, and its Great Her Majesty is giving it its support. And she did indeed do her first tweet and actually managed to use just about every character you can imagine in her 140 odd.
Which might have been pre-prepared, one assumes.
She pressed the send button,
Yeah.
and I'm glad she joined the real world, because everybody knows that the real business is carried out on Twitter nowadays.
Yeah, well, I should be careful with your knighthood, Mark, about that. A bit more deference to Her Majesty's
Well, there's a very interesting
tweeting
tweet
skills.
that Prince Philip to join Twitter. It would be awesome.
Yeah.
I think perhaps we might...
I mean, I would hope they would give us some cheeky insight into the life at Buckingham Palace, and maybe a joke or two as well.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah. And the first troll, welcome to Twitter, abdicate.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, lacking
Do we
a
know if
certain
it's
sort of...
a Republican troll?
Yeah, it didn't really
Yeah,
have it.
not exactly imaginative, is it? But what a lovely lady you are, Your Majesty. So pleased to be able to follow a wonderful Twitter page. Perhaps from inside Buckingham Palace, that one, who knows? I don't know. But anyway, there we
then
are.
there's the call for the selfie, but we all know that
Yes.
Prince Andrew has that sewn up as far as the royals are concerned.
Right.
She didn't seem too enthusiastic about it, though. It was more of a procedural matter for her, really.
Yeah, well, there we are. Right,
What a
one
bit
last
like a
look
big
at the
bill
inside of the
from
Mail.
European Union.
Page 7. At the bottom, we've seen, of course, Asher there, but tougher drink drive law for Scotland. Devolution already on its way to that degree?
Yeah, well, it looks like it. I mean, they're going to cut the level down to the 50 milligrams level. This is going to be a real shock to Nigel Farage, who finds that it's the same as it is in Europe as well.
So, Hogmanay, be aware if you're going from south to the north of the border.
You can get caught.
Right.
I mean, it's a perennial debate, really, about those arguing you shouldn't be driving at all
Yes.
if you've had a drink. But I think what it doesn't take into account is people have different metabolisms, and, you know, some people can drink very little and still, carry the alcohol for a long time.
Anyway, cheers for your selection. We'll see you again at 11:30.